So I moved to San Francisco when I was 13 from Italy, from Rome. And then when I moved here, I I became interested in like filmmaking really as my kind of first passion, or first medium that I played around with. So I was making videos and that were like mostly skate videos, and like little like goof around kind of movies with my friends. Um, and but at the same time I was also making like a lot of zines, like just photocopied like things that I liked, like which were mostly like collage and movie reviews and like um, just like these kind of like hodgepodge little fanzines. um, and then I went to college, my parents moved back to Italy when I was 18, so I stayed and went to like USF, which is a liberal arts school, and I ended up focusing on media studies there. And from that point, I got like really into like kind of the theory, behind film and television production, but also like media theory. So that program there was like some practice, but and some theory. So like I studied with like Melinda Stone, Sam Green, people like that, and then on the theory side of things, I had this really great mentor named Andrew Goodwin who passed away, but he was like a media theorist, who introduced me to like some amazing things like John Berger, which is like a big foundation for me, and this television serial show called The Prisoner. There's so much theory in that show, like that's very evident. So I was sort of thinking like how I first started becoming interested in like how you consume visual text. Like I guess it's something that happens in college, like I'm sure it happened for you. It's like you've been watching these things your whole life, and it's not like the content is changing, you're just watching it from a different perspective because you're like thinking critically about it, and you become like obsessed with that. I have my own visual art practice, and then I have my job, which is Culpa Press, and in which I'm like a publisher, and I work with David Kasperzak, and we make books together. But slowly over time, those things have become like pretty hard to distinguish from each other, because I make my own books and I put them out under Culpa Press, and a lot of the same sort of like energy that I put towards art projects, I put towards other people's art projects. Yeah, and I think that's what publishing is. It's like it's like a collaborative process with the artist, and making a new object together, or at least that's how we've always treated it.
Wow.
So for me, it's like it's hard to imagine like conceiving of an art show and not having it have the same like sort of like rigor as a book has, where it doesn't only have to exist, it has to like convince you why it exists. I designed the show. Obviously like Chris, who's the Grunder, who's the gallerist there, like gave me a lot of great feedback. But yeah, now for me it's like, so every time I work on an art project of my own, I start by making a book. So I'm like, oh, I'm gonna photograph. I think for this show I photographed like 200 films. Yeah, and then I kind of like based around a loose theme, which was that I wanted to shoot like empty interiors, as just kind of like an organizational principle, which I do for like all of our publishing projects. I'll just be like, let's just start with something as like an organizational principle, because I feel like making stuff with like the expansiveness of everything that's available to you now is like a little overwhelming. So I always need to be like, okay, well I know that if I'm going to shoot it on my color video printer, which is basically like a camera that hooks up to your VHS player, which is how I make all my images. Like I know if I have to shoot it on there, we have to have it on tape, or I have to be able to get it on tape, and so that whittles it down, right?
Yeah, that's why you got this like different textures of the colors, layers.
Oh, well, that's done because I do like this color separation process, and I print it on the risograph. Mm-hmm. But the originals, which are like the glossy ones, those are a color video printer, it's called, which is basically like the predecessor to a screenshot.
Oh yeah, I read about it in your website.
Yeah, so you plug it into your VCR, and then you can take basically Polaroids of whatever's on the screen.
Oh, wow, that is cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and you can still buy the film because they use it for like sonograms and like colonoscopies and stuff like that. Because it's like just any analog video feed can go into it. But yeah, so I start with that, and I'm like, I'm gonna, interiors and films, which I think is like kind of an interesting topic, but not interesting enough for a whole show, and so I shoot them all, and then I like look at it, and I started to become obsessed with this idea of like, well, because I look at them all spread out on a big table, and it's just like try to think about like the sequencing that would happen in the book, right? Like what images go next to each other, like what's the sequence from spread to spread. And then when I see them all together, I started becoming obsessed with this idea that it's like that the process of finding them was actually pretty difficult, because there's hardly any shots in films that are interior and devoid of characters. Because normally when people do establishing shots, they do exterior shots. Yeah. And so there were all these like split seconds, like right before someone came in or right after they left. And so they were empty rooms, but you could feel this like sort of like buzz from like the potential action that was about to happen. Well, especially with this project, right? Like if it's about space, and like, yeah, like obviously like I don't have all these ideas in the beginning of my mind when I'm making it, Yeah. But like as I started working on it, it was like, if it's about space and the space that's kind of like created between the viewer and the filmmaker, right? It's like a shared space. It's not like it's not like a top-down kind of thing, right? Like it's like you're watching and they're giving you the visual, and so there's the thing you're seeing on the screen, but there's also like your mental image of it, right? Yeah. And so like, so I like to think about that stuff as like this shared space. And then it's like, well, if we can both inhabit that space, don't we just inhabit it? Can we inhabit it like separate from the film, right? Yeah. Like, doesn't it stay with you and you can like reuse it? And so that's the thing I was trying to like capture with that show. Like, can we all be in these spaces and not know what they're used for? Like, so you kind of live in it and you like maybe know the movie, but probably not, and it gives you this weird feeling of like, either distance or warmth, depending if it's like a horror movie or, like, can you still elicit feelings just from the interiors, because so much about film is like technique used to elicit feeling, right? Yeah. And so I don't know, I really liked that as a concept, and that's why I decided to make a show about it. In case you wanted to see it in person.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that one too, it was like the same thing. It was like, but it was more tied to, a specific place, to San Francisco. Because it's like, I was like interested in this kind of like shared construction of a city, right? Like and that one, the text that really inspired me was a film called Los Angeles Plays Itself, which is a movie about the geography of Los Angeles being like sort of like negotiated by all the films that happen there that use Los Angeles as a place to show you another city, you know? So like kind of confuses the identity of the city. So like, I mean, that's like one of the points in it. It's this amazing documentary about like how films change our perception. But I was interested in that with San Francisco. It's like how much of the way that as someone who, I feel like a local here, I've been here for a long time. And it's like, as someone who's been here forever, like, how much of the city is something that is what you might perceive as like the real San Francisco, and how much of it is like this like ideal that I hold in my head based from film, from television, counterculture, like you know. But I try to make an effort to have like a lot of different price points too, because it's like there, you know, there's always like something free, something for $10, something for $30, and then, you know, like if you can't afford the artwork, you can afford some version of it that's not just a catalog, you know. And so that's important to me, but also like the idea of art not necessarily having to have like this sort of prestige to it, you know, like a lot of the reason I started making books was like I was interested in having an art practice that was like normalized, like, oh, you know, like I could, even though it's still difficult, like I can see myself publishing and making work, and it's not like the rat race that like the big like capital A art world is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just the fact that like it should be okay. Like I've always envisioned myself like that. I've always wanted to be like a working artist, but never like a famous artist. And I know it's easy to say that because like obviously like if you anyone who could be a famous artist probably would be, and it's not like it's like an attack on fame. I just think that artists should be able to have just like regular lives, not superstars and not dirt poor, just like normal, you know. Like it's really hard sometimes to distinguish between my art practice and Culpa, just because like I've made an effort to make Culpa press very similar to my art practice, because that means that I enjoy it as much as I enjoy making art, you know? And so like when we publish books, it's like that's a lot of our income, and then the other half of it is like client work that we do for like whether that's graphic design or printing. And most of the stuff that I do is printing, like David is the designer of the group. And so like when I'm printing for other people, it scratches a lot of the same itches that printing for myself does, you know? It's like, for me, it's like I don't know, like it feels very similar to making art, because I'm just making someone else's art, you know?
Yeah.
And so so that makes me really happy, and so, but yeah, from that point, the only difference is that I really do run Culpa as a business, and it's a very for-profit business. Like I've never been like a community space or a non-profit. I mean, we do things like that, you know, we do a lot of things for the community, and a lot of things, you know, like helping out sort of non-profit art galleries and organizations, but to me what's interesting about publishing is a lot of it is the business side of it. And the reason for that is because of what we were kind of saying, like it's a way for people to collect art at a level that's affordable and practical, but also on the back end of that to be able to like pay percentages to the artists that we work with, so that it's another like kind of I mean, obviously there's a lot of labor involved, but since it's on the back end, like kind of like a passive revenue stream for them, you know? So like when we sell one of our books that we made with an artist, we give them a percentage of the sales, and that way it's like we're making money, they're making money, but we're not making like a killing, you know? But it's like everyone's kind of like compensated for their time, which I feel like in the art world maybe that doesn't happen as much. You make a lot of things in good faith, and then hopefully you sell them. To me, like the scale of publishing just makes more sense, because it's like, I just think that the idea of like convincing 200 people to buy a $30 book is a little bit more and easier to wrap my head around than convincing one person to buy like a $10,000 work. Yeah, and the more people that can kind of like join in on that, it's kind of the better. And you know, when someone buys your book and they enter that space with you, they've made this like willing choice to kind of like, you know, like think about this idea with you. And those kind of ideas like circulating and building are like what create like kind of zeitgeist, right? Like this idea that everyone's kind of having this shared thought, and that's what shapes culture. And so for me, it's like the things that I admire that have shaped San Francisco, most of them are books and magazines. Like, you know, it's not like there's a lot of artists that I admire, but most of the way that I learned about them were through books. There used to be more of here, which was like a very like counterculture alternative publishing scene, and a lot of the problems we have, I think, are like kind of like moving away from that, you know, like this idea of community through publishing.
Right.
It's different with every book, but like I think something that I've been trying to focus on is like that a lot of the spaces that we live in, whether we're talking about like San Francisco, or whether we're talking about like cinema or like online communities or gaming communities, like a lot of those spaces are very overlapping, even though they feel disparate, you know? So like when you at first glance you can be like, oh, like here are all these gamers, they play this game every night, and like it's their own thing and it's this like perfectly enclosed community, but so much of what happens in that world like kind of imprints on the world around it, and we end up like all living it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like that's just how culture works. It sort of like transfers onto every surface that it touches, and like a lot of the things that I try to look at with my art is like the moments where like kind of the virtual and the physical sort of overlap, you know, and we just live with it. Like, so the San Francisco book, it's like when I look at that house in Pacific Heights, or that house in Potrero Hill, that is like the big blue house on the corner of Connecticut and like 22nd. And then I remember that it was used as the house in this erotic thriller called Pacific Heights with Michael Keaton. And then like my mind imprints on top of that, and I can only see that house. And then what happens is what happened just now, that I think that house is in Pacific Heights, you know. And it's like that's a very literal example. But then there's more subtle things, like, or maybe not subtle, but like ethereal, like the fact. Like today is this movie where I started watching a lot of like time travel films as like an organizational principle, and realized that this weird thing was happening where it's like, since film is a form of time travel, where like you sit in a chair and make a conscious decision to watch something for 2 hours, but within those 2 hours there's the time frame of the film, right? And that film can span 50 years, it can span 10 minutes, like it can, you know, it can be like Run Lola Run, where it's the same, you know, 20 minutes over and over again. It can be like 2001 A Space Odyssey, where it's like millennia, you know, like, so that the like that's where you start to see it in like a more kind of like subtle way. It's like, well, if that's how we experience time in film, like, doesn't that kind of transfer over onto how we experience time in our life? Like, when we're engaged or focused on something, or when we're watching a movie, like, time kind of, like, real time evaporates. And it's this weird thing, like, where I don't think that they're very separate at all. Like, we live most of our lives through engaging in other people's narratives, you know? Like one thing that always comes into my mind is like, this is like why we make art, right? Like it has nothing to do with like your intention, or like what is real art, what is good art. It only has to do with something that is you can't describe in any other way, right? Like like visual art, like the reason that it exists is because it's communicating something that you can't just say out loud. Yeah. Which is why like artist statements, writing about art is so hard, right? Yeah. Because like it's really hard to describe things that felt like they needed to exist because there was no other way to describe them, right? I feel like those mediums are often, like, I hate seeing them talked about in like this 80s kind of media studies way, where it's like film and streaming and gaming and the things that I'm like pretty interested in, like, well, maybe not streaming, but film and television and gaming is like, as like these things that separate us, because I feel like they actually do the opposite, right? Like like they're experiences that really unite people, and they make communities like kind of cross over with each other. And so the more we can see them intersecting with our real life, the more we can see that there's connections between us, you know. There's something like freeing about art, right? Like where I've tried to move away from that too. I think a lot of my older work, and the things that I was also concerned with publishing were maybe like more conceptual.
Yeah.
So like I had like sort of a rigorous like theory behind them. And now I try to like make things more like from my gut, and then kind of figure out what it means later, which I find more satisfying. But I think they're both like valid ways of working. A lot of the people that like I admire are interested in the same thing. Like I have this like personal mentor here, Matt Baruso, who I like really admire his practice, because I think it's really rare when someone just like they have like a body of interests and things that they like, and then they just like collect and surround themselves with it, and then they make work with it, and it just like ends up embodying all of their ideas. And it's this very like, I hate using the word, but like kind of organic process. Like it's a very like kind of like you don't have to have this like conceptual framework for your work, because you are living and breathing it, you know?
Yeah.
And so like to me, like artists like Mark Leckey and like Paul Pfeiffer, like, you know, like they're very similar. It's like, or like, I mean, there's so many to name, like Jim Shaw, you know, Mike Kelly. They're like, there's just like everything, it just ends up being like a projection of the things that they're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And then the concept comes out of that, right? Because so but in the past I used to be like, oh, you know, I found this like, I don't know, I found this like artifact in New Mexico, and I'm gonna like do a rubbing of it because it's like a fake artifact, and I still like that work, but it's very intentional, you know.
Yeah.
And now I try to be like more kind of like, I'm interested in this subject, let me investigate it and collect things from it, and then make work from it, and then it ends up being the thing that I'm thinking about anyway, you know.
You're letting go of control here.
Absolutely.
Do you think that bothers you anyway?
I think it bothers. I don't know if it bothers. It doesn't. It makes me anxious.
Right? I get that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I have like massive anxiety about most things, but like I am always anxious because it's like, I think it comes with the job, like with my publishing, or like with Culpa, with the work that me and David do, like the principle behind our publishing is basically fanzine, right? But we're not making zines, we're making like, you know, maybe a little bit above a zine, like a book. Yeah. Not also
art book.
Also zines too. Yeah, like both, you know. But it's like, that's our concept, is like we're fans. And so sometimes I get a little bit like, you know, like, oh, well, you know, what's the difference between collecting and making art? Like that line feels super blurry to me. Mm. You know, like I'm like a massive collector, a massive fan, and sometimes I'm like, there's this like ego, and I don't even mean that in a bad way, but like just ego, your identity is present when you make art.
Yeah.
That as a collector, maybe it's not so much, because you're just like admiring, and that's where my anxiety comes from. It's like, I really, like, you saw it, I mounted a show that is all screenshots. Like, that's not my work. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're films that I borrowed from. And I don't have any problem with that, because to me, like, that is art making. It's always referential, like all art is collage in a way.
Yeah.
But like, but it does make you anxious.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
oh my god, are you gonna doubt me?
Yeah, because I think it should, because like, because that anxiety makes you make these choices, right? Like, and it's not just the anxiety, it's also like ideas and conversations with people, but those are the things that make you turn it into art, right? Yeah. Like it's the sequence of the images, the arrangement of the images, the way I printed them, the the silkscreen prints that I blew up that I printed with Sun Knight editions in Oakland, which are great screen printers. So there's like, you know, you collaborate with people, you start to build that conceptual framework out of other people's images, right?
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes your art practice. And so when it gets to that point, I'm totally fine. But the process of getting it there is nerve-wracking.
That's so stressful.
And also, like, I'm happy to talk about the fact that maybe it isn't for some people. Maybe it's not an art practice to some people. I don't really care. Like, I'm totally fine to have a show that is a collection. Like, to me, it's like the only thing that makes people have to say that is the ego behind it.
Yeah.
Like, if I didn't make it, then what is it? And to me, that's like a kind of a bad thing, right? Like, you should let it be whatever it is, not try and like assign it to yourself. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those notions, and not to get like too tangential about this, but a lot of those notions lead to a lot of the problem with the way that people understand artists in society, which is it's like this pure form of expression, it's this romantic idea of creation. Yeah. And really it's like more about like curating, collecting. It's like this idea that like, oh, well, that was like kind of sort of out of necessity. Like I had a residency at this place called Kala in Berkeley, Kala Art Institute, and it's like a printmaking studio. And it was when I was working with my partner at the time, Carissa Potter. And when we our residency ran out and we split, I moved into the basement. And I was so used to having like a silkscreen setup, letterpress, all these things, that, you know, we started to make a silkscreen setup down here, but I couldn't continue to like print and produce work at the same level. So I started researching like photocopiers, and I found that a risograph was really similar to a silkscreen, but you could do it in volume, and you know, it had some of the same principles like color separations, layering. And so I found a church that was off of Dolores Park that was selling their Riso for like $200. Yeah. And so I bought it off them like on a lark, and then I brought it down here and I just started making work with it, and I like fell in love with the process.
Wow.
And this was like, you know, like, yeah, like at the beginning of Riso, the rebirth of Riso, which was like, so me and some friends that I made like through, you know, book fairs and print fairs started like trading tips, and we started like a Google group, and then it kind of like caught on, and now there's like more resources for it.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. And you were also holding the art book fair, right? So
yeah. And so that all came out of that, because like when we started making books and selling them at other fairs, then eventually we were just like, oh, we should start our own fair. And so me and David started it with Park Life, which was a store in the Richmond district, run by Jamie Alexander and Derek Song. And then we approached Minnesota Street Project, which is the venue, and asked them if we could have it there. And then they became like our third partner. Yeah, I mean, the book fairs are like kind of like what makes it all possible, like to be a small press art book publisher, because it's where you know, not only can sell your work directly to the public, which is very important for us because we make so few of them that when they go to stores, you know, the store takes 40-50%. And so that becomes important, but also it's the place where you like trade ideas and techniques, and you know, it's really important to talk to other publishers. I'm super grateful to be a part of that community, because like it's everyone making their own art and work with other artists that normally are people that aren't, you know, like superstars, like just normal working artists, and like sharing it within a community that can self-sustain and buy each other's stuff, you know. like I often feel that like all the books we make, we just sell to other art book publishers. You know what I mean? Like there's very few people that buy them that aren't just people that are also doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But I love that, like, because it's like we're trading ideas and these artists that we don't know about, and to me that's like there's something like it's a really easy way to exchange ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look, there's this artist, I made a book about him, and then they give you theirs, you know. So
how do you define like maybe the style for Kofa Press?
Oh man, I mean, I think that number one is that we're fans, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like was what I was saying, like it's a fan zine. We only publish things that we're like completely desperately obsessed with, you know. Like I love every, like the Basement Tapes books, which is like our VHS collection. You know, like we have to be so intimate and like with the material that we care about it. Or the Rave Flyer books, which are like, you know, I was like a little raver when I was a kid here, and was like and DJ'd at raves, and I got into that scene, and so those are like the love letter to that scene, you know. And then the same thing goes for artists. They're people that we approach just because we love their practice and we want to make like something with them that is unique to the book that we're making.
Mm-hmm.
So I think another part of it would be is that we always try to work with an artist to make, like, generate new work and not just make like catalog. When we like conceptualize or design the book, we try to make it look like a book we would make.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I talk to my students about this a lot. It's like this way of like if you put that same sort of effort and energy towards your client work like that you put towards your own projects, your like self-generated projects, it like helps you develop this kind of like cohesive identity where people then know to come to you for a certain thing, you know?
Yeah.
And like, you know, it's nice to be able to help people out by like designing whatever they need, but it's so much easier when you go into the meeting or to talk to them and you have ideas, you know, because otherwise you're just like responding instead of being active, you know. It's like when other people do it, they're counting on you to have that knowledge and that skill and that desire to want to make it, you know, art, because otherwise they're just paying you and you make this like lifeless book for them and then it does nothing for them, you know?
Yeah.
So those two things, fanzine / new work. Like from living here or from, I don't know. I mean, it's like it was kind of what we were talking about, like where it just becomes a collection of the things that you're interested in,
right?
You know, so like for me, it's like when I see, like when I look at our books, I can see all of the influences that I have because they're really visible to me, you know, like, like you know the kind of like all the publications that I admire, like Mondo 2000, like which is like old cyberpunk magazine. Like there's like just you can feel the Bay Area kind of history in the publishing, or hopefully that's what I'm hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, and then all the artist books of the people I've seen over the years and sort of admired and borrowed things from and their style, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, to me it's like that's the answer is always that, like your style is a collection of all the people that you've met and been inspired by, you know. So I think that it's like somewhere in between all the things that I like.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Especially people that I see every day, you know, like yeah, because I think that's like an important thing. Like you can have the people that you kind of like, you know, like the Mark Leckey who lives in like London, you know, that I admire as an artist, but like but it's so important to have those people that are around you too, because you can actually talk to them about their work. You can talk to them about your work. So it's like David King or Matt Baruso or Barbara Solomon are like all people that we've published, but they're also all people that and David Bayes, who's like actually my studio mate, Mitsuo Kubo, who I made the basement books with. Like, I admire all of their artwork, but they're also people that I talk to and see very frequently. And so that it's like trying to collapse the idea of like fandom and friendship, you know, and collaboration.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you start becoming like friends with the people you admire, it's like it all starts to work out perfectly, you know. But yeah, and then this is like where I do all the Riso printing. Yeah, I don't know if you ever played around with one of these. It's like it's a drum process. So it's not like a CMYK process. It's like spot color printing. So you have to have every color that you print. So like you have.
I watched YouTube for this.
Right, okay, cool. So yeah, so you print like fluorescent pink. You don't print magenta.
Yeah.
And then this is the video printer that I was telling you about. So like if you take a movie. Like we usually just watch them on here, and then if you want to take a screenshot of them,
Yes, please.
you can like bring it over here and like this is like the sync monitor.
Honestly, like, I didn't grow up watching this kind of television, so like, just literally seeing those kind of image is already an art for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm just so unfamiliar with it.
Because it has like a different
Texture,
kind of texture,
and it's
yeah.
so grainy, and I didn't grow up with it, and so it is art.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I just love the idea that it was like a photographic process, but the technique was almost like something that you would consider like a modern technique, right? Like the screenshot.
Yeah.
And so I like the idea that you're like taking a picture of it.
And you're also kind of like returning the labor in the process to the product.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
you're printing it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, and I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like street photography or something. It's like when you are outside and you take a photo of the building, it's like that photograph ends up being like a mediation or I guess you could call it a collaboration between like the architect and you, the photographer, right? So I always thought like it could be like a similar kind of thing with screenshots. It's like this kind of like mediated artwork between you and the filmmaker. But yeah, you just capture, and then when you hit print, it does like a CMYK photographic process. So right now it's like printing cyan, magenta, yellow, and black in like photographic layers. And then when it comes out, it'll be like this 5x7 kind of glossy Polaroid. I also like this idea that like once you have the image, you have like a bunch of different versions of it.
Yeah.
Like the Riso and that image is in the book, but it's also a frame in the show. It's a blown up screen print.
Yeah.
Right? Because it doesn't, like, the way that objects exist is between experience and reality, right? Like somewhere in between. It's never one or the other.
Yeah.
There's the image you're looking at, and then there's the mental image you have. And the truth is like a mediation between those two.